Hey, everybody. I'm in the midst of a conversation with Dr. Bruce Alexander, and it's going to be pretty casual, but I think we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about resistance recovery and also the status of dislocation theory in the wider world. So why don't we talk about that for a second, Bruce? What's happening with dislocation theory from where you're sitting?
Well, it's the paradigm is shifting, and it is for sure. It seems to me, from where I sit, because I get all this mail, and
You do.
and all these invitations, and the paradigm is shifting as it should, and it isn't just because of dislocation theory at all. I mean, there's yourself, for example, and there's literally hundreds of really sharp professional people moving in a similar direction. And I think you can feel a paradigm shift. It's like tectonic. You can feel the ground shaking, and I feel it. Which makes me so happy to have lived long enough to feel us shifting. So, that's what I'm writing these days is about the tectonic events that are happening. And it's because of guys like you and lots of other guys like you and guys like me and lots of other guys like me. So it's a movement.
So are you seeing it is it uneven in geographically? Is it some parts of the world you're getting more mail from some parts of the world than others?
Oh yeah. And I mean, you could say it's uneven professionally. I think that the professions, the psychologists and the psychiatrists, will be the last to know.
Yeah, very reluctantly at that.
Yeah.
Grudgingly, I should say.
Yeah, because there's nothing in it for them really, except of course many of them really care about the people they're trying to help, but really it's a bottom up thing. And maybe I'm over optimistic. I'm old, and you get silly when you get old. So I'm old and a little batty, but I really think I feel it, that paradigm shifting.
Is it more of a European thing? I know that you've made some inroads in Southeast Asia, but
It's European. It's like I'm doing a lot in Brazil these days, and of course they've got to deal with Bolsonaro,
yeah,
who is their Trump,
right.
and at the same time they can people are divided everywhere, but there's lots of people that are rising up to say we have to think about addiction differently, and that means we have to think about all of mental illness, so-called, differently, and we have to think about alienation differently, and we have to think about the future differently. And of course, we're in the midst of this virus, right? This pandemic, and that too means we have to think about everything differently. So it's a kind of cool time.
Yeah.
And you've just been telling me about resistance recovery, and I'm just putting that on my list of all these things that are happening. And I hope you're going to tell me some more about that. Like I'd like to know where you see that going. I understand it's not just you, it's a lot of people, but I'd like to know where that might be leading.
Well, I mean, I think there's, this is something that you've spoken and written about, but the false binary of treatment versus incarceration.
Yeah.
And the excluded middle being some kind of community. I think in my 4 years at GRC, when I was using dislocation theory as a treatment modality, I learned a lot. So I really learned, you know, where it stands in the relation to treatment with somebody who's in post-acute withdrawal, and how the addict can contextualize their experience and start really understanding kind of like a social etiology of how they became addicts. And
Yeah.
I'm convinced of the value of that after doing that for 4 years. So resistance recovery in a way is about continuing that, meaning it's there for the parents of the addict, it's there for the psychologist who's trying to think out of the box, it's there for the person who's been in recovery for X amount of time and has questions that weren't answered by AA or maybe their therapist, or, you know, it's that kind of thing. So it's trying to build community. Obviously it's digital and it has a lot of disadvantages, but roughly 1/5 of the members are in Portland, Maine, which is because I have all these roots and connections there. So we are hoping that, you know, once the quarantine's gone, we will start meeting face to face in addition to the digital. So it's trying to have a healthy and robust conversation, kind of continually and nonstop, reflexive, critical. Yeah, that's really where it's at.
Well, that's amazing and wonderful. I just read in the Culkin book a critique of a chat room. I think it's called Sober.
Yeah, the one in Boston.
Yeah, and he's saying that thing is toxic because they're selling the data. They're selling the you know, the facts about the people who are participating for whatever, for targeted advertising.
Sure.
Or then they and he's saying, you know, that's really scary. But what you're doing, I mean, obviously you're not selling the data. I know that, so I won't ask that question. But yeah, it seems like something that there really needs to happen, and it needs to be not commercialized in the way Facebook is, and of course it is. So congratulations, hooray!
Well, much appreciated, and thank you for doing this. When you get queries about your work from the academic side, what departments are they coming from?
Not from psychology.
Yeah.
And not from medicine. I have to think. Okay, then what departments are they coming from? Social work.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And social work is cool because I don't know if you're following this, but some of the most amazing research right now is being done, for example, in the Arctic, in the Canadian Arctic. There's incredible research on the way in which colonization has broken things down, and the way in which the recovery is materializing, and it's done by social workers.
Really?
And, yeah. Would you? And you know, I don't normally think of social workers that way. I think of social workers going around with clipboards to people's houses, but no, there's social work, and there's geography. And again, there's social geography. Geography, you know, and when I studied it in elementary school, it was about learning the area and the state capital and the most productive, most populated city in each state. but that's not geography. Geography is social geography now, and they're into all of these kinds of things. And I could, I've got a favorite geographer. I can't think of his name right now. It's not coming to mind, but I could send it to you if you're interested. Who's writing amazing stuff. So it's like that.
Yeah.
But the better answer to your question is it's not academic. The discussions that I'm having are primarily not with academics. They're primarily with just people and a lot of guys who have a history of addiction, right? And they're writing to me and saying, well, look, can we talk about this in a more detailed way?
Yeah, I bet.
And I think there's a really lot of people who've been through the school of addiction, and now they want to go to graduate school, and they're powerful people,
Yeah.
interesting people.
I find myself trying to dissuade a lot of people like that from studying human services and psychology.
Yeah.
I tell them, study anthropology, study religious studies, study sociology, and if you want to get the clinical degree, do the undergraduate degree in one of those areas, you'll be that much of a better clinician.
Oh, I agree with that. And religion in particular, I forgot to mention religion, but I'm having all this contact with religious people, which I have not been a religious person since I was 12 and I'm 80. So that's a long time.
We're still gonna get you, Bruce. We're gonna get you.
No, it isn't. Religious people get me because they are, they do good work. These guys care and they take care of people. And wow, I think that, a person has to go a long way to find a framework which is better than that, better than, a framework which is centered on love. Like they use the L word, which I hesitate to use myself, but they use this L word all the time. And yeah, that's a pretty good starting point.
Are they clergy, or are they just people that have?
Well, some are clergy, but mostly, like, there's a lot of middle ground between clergy and laymen in the Christian world. Like there's guys who are around here, there's something called house churches. Do you know
Oh
that?
yeah, big in the States too.
Oh, okay. So we know people, I'm talking about my wife and I, we know people who run house churches. And are they clergy or laymen? I don't know. But they're Christians, and they're really serious, and they take care of people. And oh, it's so exciting.
And they approach you because they got acquainted with your work along the way?
They, I'm thinking now of a particular set of friends who
Yeah.
are Christian people, and they approach me because we got everything in common except the Jesus thing. And I'm, so they say, okay, we don't worry about the Jesus thing, but we can talk about all these other details, which
Yeah.
are really important. And so that's how I'm learning about ecumenicism, if that's the way you say that word.
Right.
Is like you don't have to agree on the theological markers, but you do have to agree on the underlying, whatever it is,
Yeah.
compassion or
Yeah. The ethical arena is where interfaith dialogue is most fruitful, for sure.
yeah, that's right. And yeah, I've noticed this about Christians too, that they're really hard on each other. Like
Oh yeah.
they're harder on each other than they are on the rest of us, because like the Christians who I know, who are these people who I so greatly admire, they're compassionate, caring people. they're really hard on the other kind of Christian, the Donald Trump kind of Christian. They don't like them, and they don't hesitate to say so. So I have a lot more in common with those Christian people than I do with my psychologist colleagues, and they have a lot more in common with me than they do with some of their Christian colleagues.
Yeah.
And who knew? Who knew that the world was structured that way?
I think that's something that we're going to discover more. I mean, a good example of that is that Dunnington book you gave me.
Oh yeah.
Turned me on to. So in one of my Zoom groups, we watched some lectures of his and discussed them together. But Dunnington, that body of work gets a lot of attention in this resistance recovery community, a lot of positive attention, and only a small percentage of these people would claim Christianity. So it's really wonderful. I would put that Dunnington book, my top 3 addiction books are Globalization of Addiction, Addiction and Virtue, and this Culkin book on heroin. I think those are the really timely books.
Wait a minute. Tell me the second one again. I didn't. The sound.
The second one is Dunnington's book, Addiction and Virtue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Dunnington is so cool. And so many of these Christian guys are. I don't know if you're a Christian guy yourself, but
I am a heretic. I'm a heretic Christian. I'm the kind of Christian that really gets in trouble with Christians.
well, okay. I hope they aren't too hard on you, because I know they can be mean.
So, Mark Lewis, did you read The Biology of Desire?
Yeah.
So one of the things.
Well, I said yeah, but I should say no. I didn't finish it. I didn't like too much.
Really?
Yeah. And maybe I should. I mean, you.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's really coming up, and this is a pillar of resistance recovery, is one of the things that we're critiquing is the disease model.
Yeah.
And it's trending. I mean, you can believe what you want, but most of us are coming to the conclusion, much like you did, that this is not a disease in the proper sense.
Well, the reason I draw back from Mark Lewis, and I know him, he's a friend, but the reason I draw back from his work is that it seems to me he rescues the disease model by putting it into the language of learning theory rather than the language of the brain. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe, and he says I don't understand, and maybe that's right. Maybe I don't understand, because there's a lot of stuff I don't understand. But anyway, that's my experience with the biology of desire.
It's so interesting, because having read both of you, I see the ways that you're actually alike. To me, Lewis is saying that it's not a disease, it's a brain doing what a brain does.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's showing these certain, I hesitate to call it a pathology, because then we're back in the disease. But the reason why it's behaving the way it is, I would say links back to you, which is it's responding to a dislocated environment. So that's the way I read him.
Yeah, and then I would want to immediately quibble, and I would want to say, well, wait a minute. The brain isn't responding to a dislocated environment. The person is responding to a dislocated environment. And the person is...
I would give you that. I would just say the brain is just and now I can't think of the thinker who would say this, but there is somebody. I would say that the brain is just the outside of something psychic going on inside. And those things together are a person.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where I would want to argue, and yet I'm not sure of myself, because, because most people don't understand it, and he's a bright guy. But I want to say, look, people have to face up to stuff they can't cope with, and they can't make their way through it, and they find ways to to try to get through it, and one of those is addiction, and when they're addicted, they're, as it seems to me, and from what I know, addicted people are really trying to find a way through the swamp or the jungle, and the addiction is one of the tools they've latched onto. It seems to help a little bit, at least partly, and that's, to put it in human terms, which I understand, and but then I see Mark putting it in terms of learning theory, which is sort of like, well, the brain, when it does certain things repeatedly, it creates certain kinds of uh, pathology. Really, it creates circuits that must be continued, or that must accelerate in that direction. And it's sort of, it's no longer a person trying to do something. It's a brain following the laws of the brain. And I want to say, no, it's a person following the laws of a person, which is, a person is trying to survive and trying to make it work, and trying really, really hard. And so I object to changing it into a brain language. And he says, well, the brain, what we're saying is really the same thing. When I say, no, it isn't. So anyway, that's
no,
my.
that's a point well taken, because if I'm hearing you right, you're saying his approach is actually more reductive.
I'm saying it remains reductive, yeah.
Yeah.
And it remains deterministic, as opposed to saying, well, look, people try so hard to make it work, and it's not that something is forcing them to do that. It's not some circuitry that makes them do that. It's almost a religious thing to say. It's saying, that's the soul, man. That's what we do. We try to get better, and we try to improve things. We try to find a way that'll make it work. And of course there's neurons blinking off and on all the time we're doing that. I'm not to saying it's magic, and I'm not even trying to say it's spiritual. I'm just trying to say that the ultimate way that I can comprehend it is in that human language, rather than in the brain language or the learning theory language. And I think something is lost in the learning theory language. Yeah. So Mark and I used to be friends, but we don't talk much anymore, because we've had that standoff. I think I should better go back and read it again.
Well, no, it's really interesting, because I can see how I read it. I was really in I'm going to synthesize these guys mode, but I appreciate your objections. But you do sound like a much more humanistic / religious thinker here, because you're really talking human dignity, human agency, and
sure. I mean, you don't have to be religious to talk about that stuff, right? I mean, that's,
yeah.
I mean, isn't that the world we live in? That's the world I live in, anyway. That's the way I see people, and I don't see it as religious. I mean, I know that there's a brain, and that we could ultimately, if we wanted to, we could work out all the connections in the brain, and we could see why it is that we are like that, or we could follow all the generations of evolution, and we could say, well, this is why it is that we are like that. But the fact is, we are like that. We try. So we're watching our 5-year-old grandson now, he's having trouble at school, right?
Mhm.
tries so hard. And now the last 5 days, because he only goes 1 day a week now because of the virus. The
Mm.
last 5 days he's got it right, and everybody's happy. And we can all see how hard he tries
Yeah.
to make, and that's the world I live in anyway. And that's how I understand people who, have addiction issues, as I have, and it's, so I'm really talking about the way I experience myself, of course. I mean, I think we all kind of do that.
Yeah, oh, sure, of course we do. So then, um, is there some, where would you see your work relative to, say, somebody like um, Gabor Mate?
Well, I think Gabor and I, we're also friends, but we're still speaking. Like Mark and I really aren't. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I like what Gabor does. I think I have an objection to Gabor too, if you want to hear it. Uh,
Of course I do.
well, it's that
It's brain candy for me.
well, it's sometimes he and I have been on the same stage,
I've seen that, yeah.
and people say something from the audience, and he's saying, well, I think what really happened is this and this and this, and he's sort of psychoanalyzing them from the stage, and I don't think he should do that. Um, but I I I think he and I think, in a rather a more similar way than he and Mark. Of course, he's a doctor, and he's into brains too, um, and he's into trauma, and of course trauma matters, but uh, I think it's possible to overplay trauma, because I think that an awful lot of what happens is not like a child is beaten or a child is raped, and those things happen and they're horrible, and of course they leave a mark. But the context in which those things happen continues. It's there before the traumatic event, and it's there after the traumatic event. And I rather suppose we could put too much weight on the traumatic event itself. Rather, I mean, the same people who do the traumatizing thing are not cool before and after they do the traumatizing thing too. Uh, so so I that was that's where I would quibble with Gabor, that maybe we could put too much weight on the trauma.
Yeah, my reading of the two of you is I tend to side more, well, as you probably realize, with dislocation theory, because I think it's the more global theory. And in dislocation theory, there's more room for something like chronic stress
So what
to
word? What chronic? What kind of stress?
chronic,
Chronic. Yeah.
yeah, chronic stress to lead to dislocation. That it does not have to be combat or sexual assault. It can just be
Yeah.
trying to keep your head above water in 21st century America.
Yeah. And of course it can. There are traumas in there. Um, it's not to deny the importance of trauma. It's just to say that you don't actually have to have uh, something as horrible as a rape or a terrible beating for it to be fucked up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's kind of in our critique of AA, there's almost a taboo against saying, many people tell their stories like this. I had a pretty good background. I came from a decent family. And then they really point to themselves as some perverse thing in themselves that chose to go down the road of, vodka or whatever, as opposed to actually telling a story that's more global, that says, it was okay growing up, but then my dad lost his job and things got hard, and my sibling came along and less attention was paid to me, and then I fell in with these kids that, it's almost like that there's I think this is part of what you're talking about when you're saying there's a paradigm shift going on. I'm actually seeing it on a more micro level around things like that people are beginning to say that, some of this, like one thing that we notice is that if you go into an NA meeting in a large American city, it will look a lot more like America, meaning different skin tones, a more politically savvy audience, meaning they understand how the game is kind of rigged certain directions. And if you still go to an AA meeting in lots of parts of the United States, it's predominantly a white male affair. And not everywhere, but there's a lot of that. And there's still this more implicit narrative of there's a normal world out here. And if you just do recovery, you're the abnormal one. Do the recovery and you can become adjusted. You can have the American dream. Yes, this Horatio Alger kind of thing built into AA, that I don't think you see that nearly as strongly in NA.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I know that critique has been made of Bill W. That even after he became Bill W., the AA guy, he didn't write off. I mean, he was a stock dealer, right? And he didn't write that off. He didn't react against.
Oh no, there's no social critique coming out of Bill Wilson. No.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
No.
Yeah. But that it is somehow built into NA, or it materializes in NA.
And I think that has a lot to do with licit and illicit. Illicit drugs are more likely to bring you into crime, conflict with the criminal justice system. There's certain demographic and socioeconomic issues that are at play that you don't see as much with, I'm the businessman who, there were too many 3-hour martini lunches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's very interesting. Is there a spokesman for NA in the way that Bill W is the spokesman for AA? But the answer that comes to mind right away would be Culkin, maybe. I don't know if does Culkin have an NA?
No, he's really, his time in the 12-step world was in AA, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting when he and I compare notes, because I was already in the profession when he was using, and I was serving this northern New England area. He and I know a lot of the same people. So he was part of this wave of upper middle class white kids that got involved with OxyContin and then heroin afterwards. And that was a lot of what I was serving in the first part of my career.
Yeah. So you encountered the same people.
Literally the same people, his friends and family and such. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a small world. Yeah.
I beg your pardon?
It's a small world.
No, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things that's happening is, because I'm trying to recontextualize the steps in light of dislocation theory, right?
Yeah.
The question of selfishness, comes up. We've talked about this. The big book says it's rooted in selfishness, and this is them running with, secularizing an idea of sin that they get from the Oxford group.
Yeah.
And personal accountability becomes so intrinsic to 12-step recovery, right? But then dislocation theory comes along and say, well, there's a social etiology to this.
Yeah.
And so those two things are in, little conflict. And you and I talked about this, that what we call restless, irritable, and discontent is actually dislocation. And it was there before the drugs were picked up. So that all works. But as I bring this to people, and this happened just today, as I bring this to more and more groups, there's a kind of a little bit of a recoiling. They buy it, but they tend to think I'm trying to jettison the 12-step thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm always having to reassure people, no, I think this is a very good modality, works very effectively. I'm just trying to recontextualize it.
I love the way Culkin recontextualizes the 12-step thing. He says, really, it's about prioritizing the other, and that, it starts with the fact that you go nowhere without a sponsor, and you go nowhere without the group, and you go nowhere, and then he puts last, you go nowhere without the big guy up there. But
yeah.
but I love the way he did that.
Yeah, he's very much focused on alterity, on the other. That I think that's very right. Yeah, and that's part of his critique of hypermodernity, in that the other is attenuated now because it's always through. To the extent that there is another, it's through the digital device.
Is that really true? I mean, like you and I are digital here.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you and I have spoken in person in a serious way before. Is something lost because of the digitalization that's involved right here?
Well, I don't think it is, but I think you and I are different because we're of an age and we're Gutenberg people.
Okay.
Whereas when you're looking at an 18-year-old who communicates with their thumbs and with emojis, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's things are beginning to, there's certainly not, we're not signaling the same when you're doing that.
I'm thinking about the 18-year-olds I know, which are grandchildren. And no, my grandson, who is, I guess, about 16. Yeah, it's hard to have a serious conversation with him, even though he wants to, and even though he's got a lot to say, and he's not closed. But maybe there's a barrier there, which is because he spends so much time in front of screens. Maybe there is.
Well, some people say there's something like a loss of social intelligence.
Yeah.
At least in terms of the way you and I understand it.
Yeah, and that could be in his case. I mean, of course, he has all kinds of family problems, but it could be the screen plays a big role in that, because in the time when he and his mom weren't working out, he was on the screen all the time.
It kind of makes me wonder about, what you brought up earlier. I'm just thinking out loud. The concept of personhood. Is that something that's fading or needs to be revisited, or really need to ask what a person is again?
Well, maybe it is. And that's like it really bugs me when people slip into brain language. They don't say, well, I became angry, or they say, well, my amygdala erupted, or something.
The dopamine rush.
Yeah, maybe yeah, and maybe that's why we turn to the brain as a metaphor, because it's so hard to speak in personal language. And as I mean, you're way younger than me, but I, you know, as I recall growing up speaking only in personal language, and I hate to let go of it. Uh, but yeah, maybe personal language, yeah, maybe it is in some sense fading. And that's, again, that's Culkin, right? That's what's liquefying.
Yeah.
Or
And becoming, we're being data mined, digitalized. He said, I think it was him yesterday, he said, and then you've got this cloud, and this cloud carries, it's like a big garage or something that carries all this meaningless data related to your person, your shopping and your surfing and your
yeah,
and all that. But that is actually sort of extensive to the person now. That we're not like, Bruce, what do you think about this? Instead, there's some agent data mining you to find an algorithm to advertise something.
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe because I'm segregated with people of my own age mostly. I mean, everyone is, you know, speaks personal language and gets that. But, you know, maybe I need to know more 18-year-olds. Do you know 18-year-olds?
I deal with a lot of people younger than me by quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah. Right now, it's interesting. I'm doing a little work with these fabulous women's sober living houses in Portland, Maine. One's called the Grace House, and the other's called the Alethea House. And I think there's a certain kind of gender asymmetry going on here around recovery, where they're much more easy to engage in that personal way, whereas the guys do seem to be a little more digitized.
Why would that be?
Well, it's controversial in some quarters, but uh, another one of your peers, Philip Zimbardo,
Yeah.
he wrote a whole book about it called Man Interrupted, because he was noticing an asymmetry in his undergrads. And he concluded that digital culture in gaming and pornography in particular were having a profound effect on young men's functioning.
But why more men?
Beg your pardon?
But why men more than women?
He does get biological, so I think you might have something with that with him. But he would say that that those mediums are more compelling to guys. Pornography is more compelling, and I'm very interested in his work because I've seen this asymmetry for a while.
Wow. Somebody there.
Yeah, and I've seen this loss of social intelligence as well. Like literally, not, you know, if you're so shy and introverted that you can't make eye contact. Well, if I can't make eye contact with you, then there's a whole host of social cues that I'm not picking up on. And I'm seeing more and more young men who've spent so many years playing gaming. You know, these boys will game for 10 hours at a pop, right? And it's an all male, this is Zimbardo right here. He says it's an all male environment, whether you're playing with somebody in the same room or London.
Yeah.
And that it's your sense of self-esteem comes from how well you perform in the game. What he's basically saying is it's a set of social skills that don't really serve you anywhere outside of gaming.
Wow. Do you know any incels?
No, that really frightens me. Yeah, that's profoundly disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty scary.
Apparently it's quite a thing in Japan.
Really.
Yeah.
I, I've lost a thought there,
We're
but
men.
why boys? Right? I mean, you're saying it's biological. It's just somehow on the Y chromosome or something like that.
Well, I think he's talking, I mean, once again, he's going to take you back into brain physiology, but he has an explanation for why pornography is more compelling to men than women and the
Will
things.
Will you excuse me 1 minute? Because see this pen,
Yeah.
it isn't worth shit. And I've got to go get another pen. Would you mind? Because I want to write
Oh,
down.
not at all.
Write down the title of Zimbardo's book. And this pen, this deserves, well, I don't know. I'm not going to do anything to it right now, but I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, we're recording again. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got down that Zimbardo book,
Man interrupted.
Man Interrupted.
Mm-hmm. So the other things he says about young men failing to thrive, one of them dovetails with you very neatly. It is, he says that it's diminished economic prospects.
Sure.
So the American male, many of them can't reasonably expect to do as well as their fathers did, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the archetype of the breadwinner has kind of been eclipsed, which that actually kind of takes you closer to Culkin too, who he's saying now we all have to brand ourselves. We all have to be continually self-improving and marketing ourselves.
Yeah, but he's saying even if you're making a reasonable amount of money, it's not really an economic problem. You're still, by branding yourself, you're liquefying yourself or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you know Mary Pfeiffer?
No, now I need a pen.
Well,
How
she's
do you spell her last name?
Pipher. And she has the book, which is maybe the counterpart to Zimbardo, and it's got Ophelia in the title, the name,
Yes.
Syrian word Ophelia. And she talks about girls in pornography. And she's saying girls are being tremendously shaped by pornography, in the sense that they watch it and then they think that's what they're supposed to do. And it's crazy. So she doesn't, I think, talk about, and she writes about boys as well as girls. It's not that she only writes about girls, but she doesn't make the argument that it's particularly men that it's affecting, and yet that resonates with me. I think it might be, and especially when I think about my 16-year-old grandson, that I fear for him. He's the only person in the family I fear for. And and it doesn't really matter whether it has to do with genetic maleness or not. It could, for whatever reason, it could be more men that are falling into that, like incels and stuff.
Well,
And
it's interesting because when I go into the prison, it's kind of this artificial, well, it's not artificial for them, but they're more in the Gutenberg brain in there. They can't check out on digital devices because they don't have access. And so there's still a lot of reading, and there's still a lot of conversation about what you read. and there's still a very high premium on conversation.
Isn't that amazing? Well, they may be privileged in a certain way.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah, it's really ironic. Yeah, yeah, and so to the extent that they have college classes, you know, they're not Wikipediaing anything. They have to read the textbook and, you know, get access to a word processing program, and you know, it's still very,
wow, that's
yeah,
a thought that I have not thought of. You know, just that there would be an advantage like that to being in prison. They're sheltered a little bit.
yeah. Well, and then many of them talk about how disorienting it is if they've done a long stretch to come out and see this whole world like this.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I have got to cut off fairly soon because
That's fine. You've been very generous with your time.
I have not. I have been enjoying myself totally. Uh, and even though I'm 3 hours late to this meeting, I
That's on me. Yeah. Well, then let's stay in touch. Maybe I'll just keep you posted from time to time about.
well, I'll be checking your website. Um,
You'll
resist.
see if you can get on Facebook. There's more activity. You get more sense of a community on the Facebook page,
Some
Resistance Recovery, and you have to
uh,
uh, sign in, or
do I have to friend it or something like that?
you have to request to join.
Request to join. Okay, I can do that. I resist Facebook, um,
I
but
had a feeling.
yeah, well, for the obvious reasons. Um, but I will be checking it out.
Hey, there's no way that the paradigm shift will happen without Facebook. It's just, it's part of it. It's
I
one of the
mean,
meat
because so much conversation is processed through Facebook. Is that why?
and information too. You know, I post your recent articles off of your web page onto my Facebook page. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's wonderful for me that you do that. Uh, but I wanted to ask you, you know, I wrote this article about gambling addiction. I don't know if you possibly have seen that. It's on my web.
I haven't read it, but I've seen it.
Yeah, okay. And what had occurred to me as I studied gambling addiction for a while before writing it and talked to some very serious gambling addicted people, what occurs to me is that Trump is a gambler.
Oh,
For example, if you think about this Tulsa business, I mean, he took a huge gamble there that he could pull it off, you know, go in there on Juneteenth, however you say that, and go in there in spite of the coronavirus. Um, well, those two things, I guess, but there's a third. But let's just say those two. Huge long shot gamble he took. And
yeah.
if it had worked, if it had come out brilliantly, he would be on top of the world right now because he took that change. And I think he didn't. I think he actually lost his gamble. But you know, you expect to lose on long shots from time to time. But there's a number of websites who have taken to analyzing Trump as a gambler, and I'm wondering if that makes any sense to you as a gambling addict.
Oh yeah, no, I think it makes, well, I mean, look at how much of his business was in casinos.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
I think if we put on our kind of Marxist thing, then late stage capitalism, you know, you're not producing things anymore.
yeah,
You know, so you're making money off of speculation. I mean, the financial crisis, we're actually speculating on debt, on absence. I mean, it's really wild.
Yeah.
I'm also, I'll give them a plug. I'm in a book club with some people that are very versed in Marxism, and they talk about, in late stage capitalism, the body is now the site of economic activity.
The
That we
body.
no longer have to groom children to work in the labor force because there's no jobs for them. So the body, you know, the medications, the tattoos, the selling your plasma, the being a sex worker, being
Hearing aids.
hearing, yeah, but it's the body becomes the site of economic activity.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a big piece of what we're seeing.
Yeah. No, I see that too. And it was particularly since I just spent an enormous amount of money on new hearing aids because my hearing is failing badly. And I thought, well, shit, I'm gonna put what it takes. If anything can help me hear, I'm gonna find it. And it's amazing what has been developed, the technology which has been developed. It's really,
Well, you and I haven't had any problem through this.
no. Well, this is easy. It's when there's chainsaws. Normally, what we do on Pender Island, if someone decides to have a meeting, is immediately a chainsaw goes off north of you, a chainsaw goes off south of you, a chainsaw goes off east and west of you, and then you've got to have the $9,000 hearing aids to
Right, right.
do it. But they didn't do that today. I think it's because it's Sunday.
Yeah, well, good. I'll remember that for future reference.
Okay. So yeah, I should go, and I thank you for your time, which you have been very generous with, because you're full of amazing ideas, and I wish you good luck with everything.
Well, I couldn't do it without dislocation theory, so thank you.
So can I send you the latest tome, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
it's a
Oh,
book
really?
chapter. It's a book chapter in which I transform dislocation theory. It's no longer called dislocation theory. Now it's called the adaptive paradigm. And I make the distinction between a theory and a paradigm, and develop that whole idea. So can I send you that?
Send it to me ASAP. I'd be honored.
Okay, you can't send it to anyone else though.
No, but I will read it and get back to you with my thoughts.
Okay, and you're promising not to send it to anyone else because
In front of the entire digital world.
Yeah, so everyone's heard that. Yeah. So Piers, a great pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Well, happy Father's Day.
Yeah, and to you too.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye-bye.